We all share the same planet. We've benefited from an abundance of natural resources and a stable climate for more than 10,000 years. Global commons. These are the gifts from the forests, from the oceans, and from biodiversity. But now, our planet is in danger. Beyond planetary boundaries.
We have only 10 years to bend the curve of GHG emissions. Science is very clear. We are losing species 1,000 times the natural rate.
We are the cause. Humans have become the overwhelming force determining future living conditions on Earth. This is a geological era known as Anthropocene, and the tipping point is just around the corner. Building a new framework to ensure the survival of global commons. That will be our responsibility, achieved under our stewardship. 5 new systems will be needed for renewable energy, sustainable food, greener cities, a circular economy, and digitalization or cyber global commons. These systems will be necessary to pass on a healthy and prosperous planet to the next generation. And now, global experts are discussing the solutions at Tokyo Forum 2020 online.
Good evening from Tokyo. Welcome to the Tokyo Forum 2020 online. I am this year's facilitator, Hiroko Kuniya. Humanity stands at a crossroads. The scale and impact of the human activity has grown so big that we are putting tremendous strain on the planet, and the planet is losing its resilience. We have become the species to alter the planet Earth. If we don't change course quickly and steer ourselves towards sustainability, we could throw ourselves into global environmental crisis. Our future and the future of other species are at risk. Scientists say in the next 10 years, what we do will be critical. The theme of this forum is Global Commons Stewardship in the Anthropocene. To restore the health of the planet, we need to drastically transform our systems. But how do we do that? It is a daunting challenge, but we have no choice but to make it doable. Now I would like to invite Naoko Ishii. She's the content producer of this forum. She is the inaugural director of the Center of Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. Prior to becoming the inaugural director of the center, she was the head of the Global Environmental Facilities for 8 years. And Naoko-san, please. Scientists say that the next 10 years will be critical, and we have to make drastic transformation and kickstart the transformation to save the global commons. But the word global commons and the concept of global commons remains relatively new to us. Maybe I should start by asking you what global commons is and the definition, if you may.
Thank you, Kuniya-san. Hello to everyone. It is very important to understand that our lives are supported by a stable and resilient Earth system. Our climate, forest, lands, water, and oceans are the very foundation of our well-being, and that is our global commons. So long, we have treated our global commons as infinite or limitless, and we have put a tremendous pressure to the global commons and to their breaking points. That is why, and we have already started to change the function of the Earth system. Some geologists are telling us that we enter a new geologic era, the Anthropocene era of humans. If we do not want to lose this unstable, resilient planet, it is our turn to change our way the way we produce and consume, the way we eat, the way we move around, the power up, the entire way that we live. There is an SDG, yes, here it is. And this SDGs can be understood as 3-layer wedding cake. This bottom layer, bottom foundation of the SDG is actually the forms as a goal for climate, biodiversity, and water. And that bottom layer is our global commons. And all other goals, like a social goal, economic goal, can be pursued on this global commons. So that once we lose it, all other SDGs would collapse.
Right. Thank you for that definition. It's crystal clear. The bottom layer is the very foundation of our society and our economy. Okay, this forum starts with an opening remark by the president of Tokyo University, Makoto Gonokamis. He has a vision that universities should plan an active role to catalyze social movement to tackle challenges of global scale. President Gonokamis, please.
Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. I'm Makoto Gonokamis, President of the University of Tokyo. Distinguished guests, panelists, and participants, on behalf of the University of Tokyo and Chey Institute for Advanced Studies, the co-organizer of Tokyo Forum 2020 online, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the Tokyo Forum 2020 online. We have over 30 speakers from various sectors, including policymaking, business, nonprofit organizations, and academia. We have more than 4,000 registered participants around the world, and we would like to thank you all. Tokyo Forum was started in 2019 with the support and collaboration of the Chey Institute for Advanced Studies. We plan to hold this forum every year for at least 10 years under the overall theme of shaping the future. This year, we focus on global Commons Stewardship in Anthropocene. Scientists have made it clear that our development has been supported by the stable and resilient Earth system, which is our climate, forest, water, land, and oceans. That is our global commons. However, the world is facing unprecedented challenges on a global scale, such as COVID-19 and climate change. Those challenges are the manifestation of our current economic system, pushing the carrying capacity of the Earth system to its limit. Geologists say we have entered a new geological era, the Anthropocene, the era of humans. Humans are the first species which have started to alter the function of the Earth system. To tackle those challenges, we need a systemic transformation of our current economic model so that our prosperity is sustained within the boundaries of our Earth system or our global commons. During the past decade, broad efforts such as the Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Climate Accord have been made to preserve the Earth system and stop climate change. The reality is, however, that the world has not been able to act in harmony to achieve these goals. In fact, the reaction to COVID-19 until recently, has clearly shown the opposite, with countries openly prioritizing their self-interest. We have learned that protecting the commons on a global scale is not an easy task and requires innovative approaches. We must come up with new ways to transform the behavior of countries, companies, and individuals towards safeguarding the global commons. That is the University of Tokyo's motivation for establishing the Center for Global Commons. The center is partnering with top international institutions to model scenarios, to show us pathways forward, produce a global common stewardship index to guide our behavior and promote systems change through a multi-stakeholder coalition. Our hope is that these tools together will catalyze behavioral change as a country, business, and individual level to steward the global commons. I want to make one key point here. For us to succeed in safeguarding the global commons, we need to secure the global commons in cyberspace, which is deeply integrated with the physical world. Ever since we started using the internet, we have accumulated a great amount of data. Utilizing this big data is a key to securing the global commons. The reality is that cyberspace can also disrupt progress. Currently, cyberspace is full of fake news, offensive behavior, and transnational cyber terrorism. This is creating a new fears and concerns for humanity. We need to govern cyberspace properly to safeguard the global commons. Let me introduce one pioneering challenge in this regard. Our commitment to sustainability and utilizing data for that purpose goes back a long way. In 2008, we launched the U-Tokyo Sustainable Campus Project, TSCP, in collaboration with faculty, students, and industry. TSCP aims to realize a low-carbon campus by applying advanced research in sustainability science. A key function of this project is to monitor, analyze, and share data on campus electricity consumption. We set up a total of 665 data points on our campuses to collect electricity data. The real-time analysis, as shown in this slide, allows us to take measures to balance activity and the effective reduction of the total energy consumption. One of the early highlights was our response to the Great East Japan earthquake in March 2011, when the entire nation experienced shortage of electricity. Using TSCP data, we were able to quickly draw up and implement plans to save energy consumption and minimize adverse impacts on our research and education. We found this system very useful in understanding people's behavior and COVID-19. This graph compares electricity usage in Komaba campus in 2019 and 2020, where Graduate School of Arts and Sciences is located. Many on-campus research and education activities were stopped in May 2020 because of the declaration of the state of emergency. The graph clearly shows how people's activity changed as a result of COVID-19. While the pandemic is still ongoing, the real-time data shared by TSCP is becoming ever more important to encourage members of the university to change their behavior and at the same time maintain the level of campus activity through an evidence-based approach. These are some on-campus examples of leveraging data and providing feedback on our behavior. Key is making quality data accessible so that people can use it in real time to solve issues. To do this, we need a secure and healthy cyberspace. I believe this is essential to safeguard the global commons, and I hope the Center for Global Commons will fully take into account the role of data in managing the global commons. Many of today's speakers are partners and supporters of the work of the Center for Global Commons. There are many participants from Japan and the Republic of Korea. Both countries have recently declared to go carbon neutral by 2050 and are preparing pathways to implement this. I hope that today and tomorrow's discussions will shed light on new approaches to safeguarding the global commons and that Korea and Japan can benefit from them. Finally, I'm very grateful for Mr. Chey Tae-won, Chairman of SKGroup, and Park In-kuk, President of Chey Institute for Advanced Studies, for their support and encouragement in organizing this event. I hope all of you enjoy Tokyo Forum 2020 online. Thank you.
Thank you, President Gonokomi. Next, we will hear from Chey Tae-woon, the chairman of one of South Korea's biggest conglomerates. The Chey Institute of Advanced Studies is the co-host of this forum. Mr. Chey supports global and regional nonprofit organizations such as the World Economic Forum, and Mr. Chey promotes international academic exchange.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you to 2020 virtual Tokyo Forum. While most international forums or conferences are being postponed or cancelled, I would like to thank University of Tokyo and Chey's Institute for Advanced Studies for bringing us together through the online format. This year's theme invites us to shape the future through our global common stewardship in Anthropocene. The word Anthropocene was first coined 20 years ago. The Nobel laureate Paul Cruzen to define a new geological era in the Earth's history. It refers to the human destruction of the natural environment, which was dramatically altered the Earth's overall environmental system. Consequently, we've entered a new period in history where we have to fight environmental damage for our own survival. Taking the nature of the granted, the human beings have simply been overutilizing our dominant influence on the environment. The current powerful pandemic, this seems to be the karma or cause and effect of our activities. Mother Nature's awesome power eventually brought human civilization to its knees. Now, we are forced to re-evaluate our common stewardship. Fortunately, however, the global community has been collaborating in many ways. With the UN SDG programs at the helm, the Kyoto Protocol, the Paris Agreement, and the private sector's ESG participation has all been mobilized to solve our common environmental problem. Despite such effort, however, many environmental problems still remaining unsolved. The greenhouse gas, waste, and ocean plastic damage are increasing day by day. With today's pandemic added to our list, we are now facing not only discomfort, but matter of survival. Perhaps this is all due to the humanity's uncontrolled greed, the selfishness, and apathy. Now we are forced to find a new system or a method that can ultimately control or transform our bad behavior. But the question is how? Different professions and sectors will have to different focuses and lenses in addressing this question. As a corporate person, however, let me share with you 3 key factors that I believe can change human behavior: the corporate strategy, the regulatory system, and human heart. The first, corporate strategy. The corporation must fundamentally shift the way we conduct our businesses by integrating the ESG, or environmental, social, and governance factors. Gone are the days when companies only have to focus on maximizing tangible and measurable economic value. Eco-friendly business practice, the social value creation, and the trust earning the governance are now imperative for survival. In reality, today's investment standard has already forced changes in corporate behavior. Today's stakeholders and investors fully understand that companies' ESG performance has an ultimate impact on a long-term success. And corporations are beginning to view the ESG initiatives from the perspective of corporate or financial strategy clearly aligned with today's new market demands. In return, the corporations received an assessment of its true market or the company value based on its viable financial story. Furthermore, a steady improvement of measurement methodology is also changing corporate behavior. While there is still much work to do, SKGroup joined forces with global partners such as BASF, the Deutsche Bank, and Novartis to collaborate on the Value Balancing Alliance. Mitsubishi Chemical became the first Japanese company to join the alliance. The objective is to build a common social value model and set up the industry-wide accounting or measurement standards. As we expand our measurement standard across industry and countries, I'm confident that more companies will join our alliance to share our measurement standard. In the near future, our alliance can also create the new methodologies to measure environmental and governance factors as well. Second, the regulatory system, we must not only agree to measure the ESG, but also compensate for the value the corporation have created through the ESG practice. For example, 5 years ago, the SK established the Social Progress Credit, or the SPC initiative, to create an ecosystem that enhanced social value generation. The idea was to give the tradable monetary value to the social good created by the social enterprises. The whole experiment, however, aimed at the providing incentives to social enterprises to create more social value. Likewise, the SPC concept can also be applied to the wide array of public and private sectors to measure and compensate and thereby incentivize environmental, social, and governance factors. For example, the environmental progress credit can provide a tradable monetary value to the eco-friendly value generated by companies. With our initial success in SPC, we can look forward to self-sustaining ESG mechanism where ESG initiated value can be traded among the investors and credits can be priced by the market. Finally, the human heart. Based on my experience and observations, however, we cannot simply rely on measurement and compensation alone. Without a true voluntary and willing the human spirit, the rules and regulations will not simply become the burdens to meet the numbers in our financial statement. So, how can you become true motivated, voluntarily and willingly? My word is empathy. I believe we need to find a way to increase level of our empathy, or gyokan in Japanese. It means our ability to understand and share the feelings of others, feelings of those who are hurted by COVID-19, by environmental damages, or our simply apathy and hatred. This is not easy. All too often, we are driven by the individual or the corporate or national self-interest. So, how can I raise the level of my inner conscious to embrace the interest of others as my personal interest? True to any discipline, perhaps we have to train or incentivize ourselves to learn about empathy. This year's Do쿄forum could not be more ideal for putting the word empathy on our discussion table. To this end, the academic institutions, the companies, and the government can collectively develop programs and seminars to explore the deeper meaning of empathy. I must confess my limitation to translating my thought into the one perfect word or the expression that everyone can agree upon. Perhaps Do쿄forum can guide and enlighten us on the endeavor. This is our common stewardship. Thank you.
Mr. Chey, thank you very much for that message. It was the chairman of the SKgroup. Now here I would like to quickly run through the two-day program. Immediately after this, we will have two keynote addresses, one by Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University and another by the chair of IPCC, Lee Ho-seng. Then this will be followed by a high-level special dialogue on why we need to focus on stewarding the global commons. The first panel then will be about how we can use COVID-19 to accelerate much-needed transformation towards sustainability. This will be the end of day one. Day two, the program has three very important sessions. One will be, we still lack instruments to help us steer towards sustainability. The second panel will look into how can Global Commons Stewardship Index help us. And this will be followed by panel 3. We will focus on much needed systemic change, particularly on the food system change. Then panel 4 will explore the impact, effectiveness of digital transformation in realizing and accelerating transformation. The final session will be a conversation with the university students and the youth. That is our program, and I hope you will stay till the very end. Our first keynote speaker is Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University. He's a leading expert on sustainable development economy. He is the president of the UN Sustainable Development Social Network. He will join us from New York, and the time there, I believe, is a little bit before about 6:30. Professor Jeffrey Sachs, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much. What a great honor it is for me to be part of the Tokyo Forum 2020 and to follow the very wise words of President Gonokomi and Mr. Chey, who got us started, and to precede the very knowledgeable global leader, Lee Ho-seng, who is the chairman of the crucial Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the most important scientific body helping to steer the world to safety. So you can imagine what a privilege I feel right now to be part of this forum. And this is also a crucial moment for Tokyo University's great leadership, one of the great institutions of the world, launching the Center for Global Commons, which is a remarkable initiative for Tokyo University in partnership with great institutions like the Chey Institute for Advanced Studies, working on new ways to solve the critical challenges that President Gonokomi and Mr. Chey have just introduced for us. With the new Center for Global Commons, I think Tokyo University will make a fantastic contribution to the world at a time when we need all of the great thinking power and leadership that can be offered. And I am so thrilled that the first leader of the new center is Ms. Naoko Ishii, a renowned global leader who has been leading the Global Environment Facility so wonderfully for the whole world in recent years, and now will lead the Global Commons Center. The theme of the forum is extraordinarily important. I want to highlight every word of the topic that we face, the Global Commons Stewardship in the Anthropocene. So what does that mean? The Anthropocene, as Mr. Chey and President Gonokomi have explained just now, is the age in which our society, our world society finds itself. Anthropocene, from the Greek roots, anthropos, meaning human, and scene, meaning geologic age or epoch. And the Anthropocene is a new term coming from ancient Greek roots, meaning that human activity, 8 billion people on the planet with modern technology and modern energy use, is transforming Earth itself in unprecedented and dangerous ways. Most importantly, changing the climate system, destroying the habitat of other species, thereby driving a crisis of biodiversity, and even creating the grounds for new pandemic diseases as we are suffering this year with COVID-19, because this is a disease that came from a virus being transmitted from bat populations to human populations because of the disruption of nature. And this is only one of many new diseases that has emerged in the last 20 years, including SARS, MERS, COVID-19, and then outbreaks like Ebola, Nipah virus, and others, which all signify natural disruption. So the Anthropocene is a new and dangerous phase for Earth and for humanity. Now, the other word in the title is stewardship. We need to manage our behavior in unprecedented ways. Sometimes in a market economic system, such as governs the world economy, each person and each company thinks about its own activity. But as Mr. Chey just explained, no company can behave that way anymore. Every company and every individual needs to think about stewardship for the world, for responsibility of management, what products and services are produced and how they are produced, and how that affects the entire world. And then the other two key words of the title are global commons. This means that the challenges of the Anthropocene involve the entire planet. Thank goodness we have a United Nations in our generation. This is the 75th year of the United Nations being honored in 2020, because we need global governance. And the word commons signifies the fact that this is a common fate for our common home. We cannot leave this to any one country or to each protecting only its own. That's why the idea of the outgoing US President, Donald Trump, when he used to say America first, was such a terrible idea, because we can't have America first or any other country first. What we need is humanity together, not any country first. This is a global commons challenge. So I congratulate the Tokyo Forum and the leadership of Tokyo University and the Chey Institute for Advanced Study in setting the problem exactly correctly, which is how can we have stewardship at the scale of the world in a new era of the Anthropocene. We know, because of the crisis in 2020, this is not simple, and our governance has not been good. There are parts of the world, thank goodness, Japan and Korea, which have done a good job in a very difficult time. Japan and Korea, China, Taiwan, Australia, New Zealand, and many countries of Southeast Asia like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos PDR, and Thailand have all done a good job in containing, even suppressing the epidemic. But I can tell you, as a US citizen in the United States, we've done a terrible job. We have a raging pandemic. While it is largely, not entirely, but largely under control in the Asia Pacific region, it is raging out of control in the United States, in Western Europe, and in Latin America. This tells us something very important. We have wealth and technology in the United States, but we are lacking two fundamental things. First, good governance. Our government has been the worst government we've had in modern history. Second, we are lacking social harmony because our society is so divided. People are yelling at each other. They are fighting with each other. They are not cooperating even to save our own lives. And so we need governance and social harmony. And we need to be guided by knowledge and by science in order to face challenges like COVID-19 or climate change induced by human activity or the destruction of biodiversity. And unfortunately, some of the richest and most powerful places in the world, including my own country, have been among the most irresponsible parts of the world. President Trump was a denier not only of COVID-19, but of climate change and of the biodiversity crisis, because he was scientifically ignorant and he was hyper nationalistic. And these are exactly the opposite of what we will need to solve the crises that we face at the global level. The news is not good or easy. Just yesterday, the World Meteorological Organization, which is the UN's agency that monitors climate, issued an update of its annual report showing that our year 2020 will most likely be the second warmest year in human record. We are just a little bit behind 2016, but warmer than every other year. We are already 1.2 degrees Celsius warmer than the pre-industrial temperatures before the Industrial Revolution started. That means we are warmer than at any time during the entire Holocene period of the last 10,000 years. We are in uncharted territory, and the climate continues to warm rapidly. The world agreed in 2015 to two enormous goals. One, to achieve sustainable development, meaning a socially inclusive and environmentally sustainable world. And second, to the Paris Climate Agreement, to keep the global warming to under 1.5 degrees Celsius. But we're already at 1.2 degrees Celsius warming, and the temperatures are rising by between 0.2 and 0.3 degrees Celsius per decade. So the chance to keep the limitation that we have told ourselves is vital is slipping away unless we act decisively now. Yesterday, Secretary General Antonio Guterres called for a global coalition to enter 2021 as a united world to face these challenges. First, we must end COVID-19 following the leadership that Korea, Japan, China, and others have shown that this virus can be stopped through responsible social behavior and through good national leadership, through global cooperation, and through the new vaccines that will start becoming available within days and weeks. So we must stop this scourge. And we in the Western Hemisphere and in Western Europe must learn from the success of the Asia Pacific. Thank you for showing us the way. Second, we must unite globally to take care of the global commons. There will be several crucial diplomatic summits in 2021 that we must attend to. There will be an Oceans Summit for Ocean Health in Lisbon, Portugal in April. Then in May in Kunming, China, there will be the 15th Convention of the Parties of the Convention on Biological Diversity to protect biodiversity. Then in September, at the United Nations headquarters will be a World Food Systems Summit to orient the production of food in a sustainable and healthful manner, which is not the case today. And then in November, there will be COP26 of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to upgrade the commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. Secretary General Guterres made clear that we must do what Japan and Korea have recently pledged to do to reach net zero emissions or climate neutrality no later than the middle of the century, 2050. And it's very gratifying that Prime Minister Suga, the government of Korea, have committed Japan and Korea to this strong goal. And President Xi Jinping has committed China to climate neutrality by 2060, and I believe that can be accelerated to 2050. It's very important that Europe has adopted the European Green Deal to match this commitment as well. And so with Korea's Green Deal, with Japan's commitment, with China's commitment, with the European Union commitment, I'm happy to report that President-elect Biden has committed on the first day of his office on January 20th, 2020, to commit the United States as well to reaching net zero no later than 2050. We have the makings of a global coalition for our global commons. Let me conclude by emphasizing that we will need new approaches for success. This is the purpose of the Tokyo Forum and the purpose of the Center for the Global Commons. What will we need? First, we will need long-term policy making. We will need to have policies not only of the life of a government of 2 or 3 or 4 years, but policies that guide us to the middle of the century to ensure that we are making the deep transformations that we need to achieve sustainable development and to protect the planet. Second, we will need to devise pathways, a crucial term that Mr. Chey used, to indicate that we need to show the way over the next 30 years to decarbonize the energy system, to reverse the destruction of biodiversity, to protect the oceans, to transform the food system. So pathway analysis will be central to our success. This will be leadership of institutions like the Center for Global Commons and the Chey Institute for Advanced Study. And I'm happy to say of Columbia University's Earth Institute and Center for Sustainable Development. This is our purpose, to chart out those pathways. We will need new kinds of governance sometimes called missions, like the moonshot mission 50 years ago. We will need to organize public and private partnerships to take on these great challenges over a span of 20, 30, 40 years. We will need new kinds of education as stressed by the Sustainable Development Goal number 4, so that everybody in the world gains an education, first in sustainable development, and second in values, in tolerance, in compassion, so that we can learn to act together with the science and with the values that are absolutely critical for success. As Mr. Chey indicated, we will need to create and foster global values based on the best of our traditions, on the harmony and knowledge of the great ethical traditions of Asia and those of the West combined for global values. And we must promote those global values to help our young people have the direction to take care and to be able to provide the stewardship. And finally, we will need cooperation at the regional and global scale. The fact that the Tokyo Forum is a joint initiative of Korea and Japan is so important and inspiring. The fact that the 15 countries of the Asia-Pacific region, including China, Japan, Korea, the 10 countries of the ASEAN, Southeast Asia region, and Australia and New Zealand recently signed the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership is very important, because those 15 countries, your 15 countries, together constitute about a quarter of humanity and one of the great regions of technological advancement to enable us to have the tools for stewardship of the global commons. So I'm very, very happy and enthusiastic about regional cooperation. China, Japan, Korea, ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand joining forces. But then I want global cooperation for the Asia Pacific, for Europe, for Africa, for North America and South America, for Central and Western Asia to be working together, especially in this critical year coming up, 2021, to stop the pandemic and to reorient us on the pathways to sustainable development and climate safety. Thank you so much for allowing me to share these thoughts. Congratulations to the University of Tokyo for launching the Center for Global Commons and for the partnership with the Chey Institute for Advanced Study. It's very inspiring and very important for the world. Thank you so much.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much for that keynote speech. We have another keynote speaker, Chair of the IPCC, Lee Hu-seng. He is the endowed chair professor at Korea University Graduate School of Energy and Environment. The IPCC has warned us in 2018 that the Earth's temperature could rise to 1.5 degrees as early as 2030. This is his message.
President Konokami Makoto, Chairman Choi-tae-won, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, and distinguished panelists and participants. I'm pleased to speak to you at the Tokyo Forum 2020 on global common stewardship in Anthropocene. This forum could not be held in a more opportune time. We're still deep in the struggle against the pandemic and now begin to see a glimmer of hope for vaccines soon to be available. The hope that we will indeed be able to recover from this pandemic and go back to a life of business as usual. So technology will have solved the problems as always has been. But would it be the solution? Would it not merely amount to taking action to eliminate the symptoms? wouldn't the next step be to reflect on the root cause of the problems? This applies to the current pandemic as well as the climate change problems. It calls for a holistic understanding about the relation between nature and humans to get at the roots of these global problems. The equilibrium that had existed for so long between nature and humans has now been breached. The evidence of this broken equilibrium is rising global temperatures, sea level rise, deterioration of biodiversity, desertification and soil erosion, ocean warming and acidification, land degradation, proliferation of persistent organic chemicals, deteriorating ecosystem services, and widening inequality and persistence of abject poverty. The damage to natural capital and increased vulnerability to disadvantaged people are unintended consequences of 2 centuries of economic progress modeled on a throughput economy. More input of materials and energy, more output for consumption, which is defined as economic progress and welfare. The use and degradation of natural capital and the residues emitted along the supply and demand change were largely unaccounted in measuring economic progress and welfare. Now we are called to face the consequences of this omission, the dangers of living in the Anthropocene. We have 2 tasks in our hands. The first is to address immediately the symptoms. The second is to get at the root cause of the symptoms and find ways to address them. The pandemic has upended our livelihoods around the world. This can be a preview of what the world can expect from the ongoing deterioration of global climate system. Stopping further deterioration of the climate systems requires us to act together to limit warming below 1.5 degrees, just as limiting the spread of virus has required everyone to act collectively to make life safer for all of us. The emissions of carbon dioxide must peak now and start driving down to net zero in 3 decades. This amounts to a 7.6% decline in emissions every year. This pathway of emissions is like a best recommended traffic route displayed on a navigation screen. Deviation from the displayed route results in inconvenience, time lost, and cost. The net zero emission pathway should serve as a baseline to organize our livelihoods. Deviation from this pathway entails resources and time ill spent. This would be the reverse of what we have framed so far about climate action. We take business as usual as a baseline, and mitigation action is a deviation from that baseline. And as such, any deviation from business as usual baseline is defined as cost, that is, mitigation cost, which is perceived as burden, thus hampering immediate action and rationalizing delayed action. By designating the net zero emission pathway as a baseline, we can then recognize any deviation, that is, increase in emissions from that baseline, a cost to society, thus prompting us to take action to reduce this cost immediately. When economic recovery begins from the COVID-19, emissions will rebound. We should be able to communicate to the policymakers, investors, producers, and consumers the cost to society of these emissions rebound. What precisely would the cost be? There are 3 dimensions: the acceleration of the speed and scope of climate change impacts, reduced options for adaptation, and increased likelihood of relying on carbon dioxide removal with a severe trade-off against sustainable development. The world will see more of the increasing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events damaging lives and livelihoods around the world. ecosystems such as coral reef and biodiversity, which are already being threatened, continue degradation. The Arctic, the dryland regions, and small island regions, which already face disproportionately higher risks under current warming of 1 degrees, will suffer more. The outmigration in countries with high dependence on agriculture will increase. An analysis based upon the International Migration Database of OECD indicates that a 1 degree Celsius increase in average temperature was associated with a 1.9% increase in bilateral migration flows from 142 sending countries and 19 receiving countries. A 1 millimeter increase in precipitation was associated with a 0.5% increase in migration. Current warming already resulted in economic slowdown in the tropics and the southern hemisphere subtropics as climate change adversely affected crop yields in these regions. A deviation from the 1.5 degree pathway, which is a net zero CO2 emissions in 3 decades, would increase the risk of crossing the threshold into a state of irreversible, non-linear changes in ocean circulations, ice sheets, and rainforests. The net zero is largely an energy transformation challenge. Energy accounts for over 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. This means energy must be at the heart of any solution. This year, the CO2 emissions dropped 7% from last year due to pandemic. With it, we suffer 1.3 million lives lost and the worst economic devastation since the Great Depression. Certainly, this is not a picture of emissions reduction we would have expected. The climate solution means emissions reductions along with economic progress and well-being throughout. That is, we need a decoupling of greenhouse gas emissions from economic development. This requires an acceleration in the transitions to clean, sustainable energy that are already underway in many countries and industries. And it further calls for a step change in technology innovation in many critical areas such as enhancing energy efficiency, making low-carbon electricity the main source for heating buildings and powering vehicles, capturing, storing, and utilizing carbon dioxide before it escapes into the atmosphere, realizing the potential of clean hydrogen across many industries, massively expanding the use of sustainable bioenergy, and building the foundation for a circular economy. The incremental share of annual mitigation investment, which includes investment in energy improvement, efficiency improvement, as well as energy decarbonization, is 0.36% of global GDP over the business-as-usual baseline share of 2% of global GDP over this decade. This means investments in low-emission energy overtaking fossil fuel investments globally by 2025. Investments in fossil fuel extractions and unabated fossil electricity generation dropping by $500 billion per year over the coming 3 decades, with investment in unabated coal generation projected to halt in 10 years. While all these efforts are crucial and relevant to restore climate stability, these are largely treatment of symptoms. Humans are at the center of the problems, disrupting, breaking down equilibrium between nature and humans. Consumption is a critical linkage between the two. Emissions pathways compatible with 1.5 degrees show that moderated consumption, that is low energy demand, shows the most pronounced synergies and the lowest degree of trade-offs with respect to sustainable development and sustainable development goals. Low demand pathways, through accelerating energy efficiency in all sectors, has synergies with Sustainable Development Goal SDG Goal 7, that is energy, SDG 9, that is industry, innovation, and infrastructure, SDG 11, that is sustainable cities and communities, SDG 12, that's responsible consumption and production, SDG 16, that's peace, justice, and strong institutions, and SDG 17, that's partnerships for the goals. Low demand pathways would result in significantly reduced pressure on food security, lower food prices, and fewer people at risk of hunger by reducing or completely avoiding reliance on bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. Consumption entails a societal burden to the extent it generates costs unaccounted by consumer. Just as the global community calls for corporate social responsibility, so it would for responsible consumption. We know from the history that technological solution resolves one problem but creates another. We need to look at the root of the problems. Recognizing that we live in a closed system will enlighten us to search for ways to continue our development within the boundaries of services the Earth provides. While urgently addressing the symptoms of climate problems, our next challenge is to lay the foundations leading to a circular economy away from the model of throughput economy. This may be the lasting responsibility of humans in this Anthropocene era. Thank you.
Professor Lee, thank you very much for that powerful and comprehensive alert from science. That was the chair of IPCC. I think the tone has been set to begin our discussion, and we will start with a special high-level dialogue. This high-level special dialogue will be conducted by very vocal leaders who have been for years alerting the world, convincing the world, and designing and driving the world to change quickly. Naoka-san, you're one of the panelists, and covering the climate change and SDGs, I feel that these are the true leaders who have been talking about the cause.
Indeed, Kuniya-san. These people are my soulmates who have been fighting for global commons for years. It was indeed in 2015 at the margin of Paris Climate COP when Christiana Figueres, head of UNFCCC, and Paul Polman, enlightened business leader, are so busy in cracking a deal that Dominic, Wari of the WEF, the leading scientist, Johan Rockström, and I, together with Sam, have started the conversation of how we could really steward the global commons. Mm-hmm. Indeed, the Paris Accord is a smash success, but after 5 years, we have to say we were off track. Mm. And every day, day by day, we have been eroding the global commons. And we really don't have a good mechanism to govern the global commons, as just the Professor Jeffrey Sachs said. So my question for this panel is, could we find a new way, new approach to break this stalemate so that we can jump on this and a totally different trajectory? So let's listen to the panel.
Yes. So the idea is to how do we can break the stalemate and the temperature rise. The latest figure is already 1.2 degrees vis-a-vis pre-industrial levels. And I wonder what the messages are going to be from these global leaders. The moderator is Dominic Waffery of the World Economic Forum. He's the managing director. Dominic, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tokyo, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you, Naiko Ishii, and thanks to Jeffrey Sachs and Lee Ho-sung for those excellent keynotes to open the 2020 Tokyo Forum online, Global Commons Stewardship in the Anthropocene. Naiko Ishii has already explained what the Global Commons are and what we mean by transformation and systems change, and these are terms that I'm sure will be central to the discussion today and also tomorrow. I'd now like very much to welcome this high-level special dialogue. As you heard, my name is Dominic Warre. I'm from the World Economic Forum here in Geneva. And through our annual Global Risks Report at the World Economic Forum, and through our mobilization of leaders from business, finance, academia, and civil society, including this brilliant panel that we have here today, over the years, we all have, including at the Forum, helped to highlight the scale of the global environmental crisis we are in, and to show how this crisis could also create not only real risks to the economy and society, but also opportunities for investment, innovation, and jobs. In fact, we produced a report in July just this year showing that a net zero emission, nature positive economy could deliver $10 trillion of new economic value and create 395 million new jobs by 2030. Indeed, the imperative to safeguard our global commons is one of the 5 pillars of our Great Reset theme, which will be our virtual annual meeting this year for Davos in January. So while the need to secure our global commons may be resonating with some, it's fair to say that there may still be others out there who are not so sure, and there's work to do, and time does seem to be against us. And on top of that, the COVID pandemic could also be viewed by some as a reason to slow down and not speed up the economic transition we need. So there is lots to talk about and even more action to get done. So to explore all of this, it's my honor and privilege to moderate this discussion over the next 60 minutes, which will look at these kinds of questions. What do we need to focus on in terms of stewarding the global commons, and how urgent is the challenge we face? What pathways exist for us to live and prosper within the planetary boundaries? And how do we need to do things differently to both fix these immediate problems and to shift onto a sustainable development path for the longer term? Now, they're quite big questions, but I'm delighted to say we literally have a world-leading panel to help us address them. So I'd like very much to welcome Johan Rockström, who's the director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research and the professor of the Earth Systems Science, University of Potsdam. Christiana Figueres, the founding partner of Global Optimism, the former executive secretary of the Framework Convention on Climate Change from the United Nations, who helped deliver the Paris Agreement for all of us around the world. Paul Polman, the co-founder and chair of Imagine, the honorary chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, and the former CEO of Unilever. Vera Songwe, the United Nations Under-Secretary General and Executive Secretary of the Economic Commission for Africa, and Naiko Ishii, who you've already heard from, but who has been the Executive Vice President and Director of the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. So welcome to you all who are listening in and joining us from across Japan, the Republic of South Korea, and other parts of the world. If your English is not so strong, you can find simultaneous translation options in the bar underneath your screen. We're going to hear from each of our panelists in turn, and then we'll have a chance to put some of your questions to them. So if you do have a question as you're listening, please do send them in. There are Slidos and other ways to do that, and we'll do our best to ask them to our wonderful speakers. Okay, let's get going. Professor Rockström, let's turn to you first. You've talked to all kinds of world leaders about the global commons and the pressure that they are under. You and your scientific colleagues have even conceived the planetary boundaries to help us understand this all a lot better. Could you share with us the core messages that you deliver when you explain your scientific research, and what you would like us and our viewers, as informed but not perhaps scientifically expert like you, what should we do with this information? I think you've also got some slides you'd like to refer to, Professor Rockström. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dominic, and hello everyone. And so let me give you a quick scientific update and overview to understand why we need to govern the global commons within planetary boundaries in the Anthropocene. So if I could get the slides up on screen, or don't I see them myself, perhaps? Oh, there we are. So to understand our future on Earth, we have to start with the most important scientific message of the last decade, which is in the title of the Tokyo Forum this year, if you take the next slide, which is that we as humanity have created and entered our own geological epoch. We are now in the Anthropocene, anthros for us humans. The modern world is the dominant force of change on the entire planet. The scale and speed and interconnections in our hyperconnected world is such that we're hitting the hardwired ceiling of the capacity of the Earth system to remain stable. This means that Ho-Sung Lee is absolutely scientifically correct when he says that COVID-19 is merely a manifestation of the turbulent world of the Anthropocene. If we take the next. So we don't have one crisis. So next slide, please. We are in a world of three interconnected crises. The pandemic is a zoonosis of virus spillovers of human unsustainable high-risk exploitation of natural ecosystems. The climate crisis is at risk of destabilizing social communities. The ecosystem crisis is at a scale of mass extinction, undermining our ability to deliver on the Sustainable Development Goals. This is the intertwined reality we're in today. But the most fundamental challenge, if you take the next slide, is in my mind that we are now, just like Ho-Sung Lee pointed out, following a pathway where we can cross tipping points, unleashing irreversible change. This, dear friends, I would argue, is the most important climate science result we have in 2020. This is the first time ever a climate model is able to reproduce the limit cycles, the cycling of the planet between ice age and warm periods, interglacials. We are in an interglacial today, since we left the last ice age 12,000 years ago, over the last 3 million years. So on the x-axis here, you have the last 3 million years. Why is this so important? Well, this is the entire Pleistocene, Holocene geological epochs. It is the period where the planet has resembled the planet as we know it. Even though she's been around for 4.5 billion years, it's only the last 3 million years she's configured in a way that we recognize, with continents and atmosphere and water and nature. On the y-axis, you have the deviation on global mean temperature. The 0 point is the pre-industrial average temperature on Earth. And look at the line, the green line. Not at one point during 3 million years have we ever exceeded 2 degrees. The planet has stayed within an extremely narrow corridor. The warmest temperatures are, not even close to 2 degrees, and the coldest temperatures, deep ice age, 100 meters of 100 meters of lower sea level on Earth, is minus 4 degrees Celsius warming. So that's the planet staying within this narrow corridor, and we've now warmed the temperature with 1.2 degrees Celsius just over the past 150 years, the highest temperature on Earth since we left the last ice age. Now, that's drama in itself. I mean, isn't that science enough to deliver on Paris? I mean, why would we want to kick the planet out of its safe corridor in its entire existence as the planet we know it? But I'll tell you, it's even more challenging than that, and even more awesome in our respect of our Mother Earth than that, because we know why she has stayed in this narrow corridor. And it's not only because the solar radiation and volcanic eruptions and earthquakes have been so gentle. Oh no, they have been shocks and very, very disturbing and potentially kicking the planet out of its stability. Now, the reason is, if you take the next slide, and we have so much evidence on this, that the planet has this extraordinary ability of stabilizing, of buffering, of absorbing. It has resilience. This is from the Global Carbon Project, the most important mapping of where does all the emission of greenhouse gases go from fossil fuel burning. So on the x-axis here, you have from 1850 till today. On the y-axis is in billion tons of carbon, how much carbon is in the planet. Above the x-axis is the hockey stick of emissions. So you recognize it, how we have exponentially increased fossil fuel burning in gray and from land use change in orange. The key is that not all of that remains in the atmosphere warming the planet. What you see below the x-axis is this extraordinary capacity of the planet to absorb carbon, dark green in the ocean, light green on land, which means that it's only the residual in blue that stays in the atmosphere that has warmed the planet. This is proof of an extraordinary capacity of the planet to self-regulate and stay within a narrow corridor when it's under stress. Now we see the first signs showing that the planet is starting to lose this capacity to remain stable. If we take the next slide. So that is the kind of fundamental recognition of why we need to stay within a stable planet. Today, we have reached a high point of 410 ppm of carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere due to fossil fuel burning and land use change. A few days ago, the World Meteorological Organization concluded that COVID-19 has in no way reduced our pressures on the planet. We are at an all-time high on concentration. And if you take the next slide, and we see the implications. So don't forget that 2020, a disaster year of the pandemic, is also a year that started with the most devastating forest fires in Australia. We have the freak fires in the Arctic because of a +4, +5 degrees Celsius warming in the Arctic, causing zombie fires in the permafrost regions. We have heat waves and floods, another year of extremes. Next slide. Mapped in a very solid way in the United in Science by the WMO and the IPCC. So I just want to guide you to that document, which is a very good summary of what's happening in the world today. But the biggest drama, if you take the next slide, is that we are at an emergency point. Over 100 cities and countries have declared state of climate emergency. But if you click again, I would argue that scientifically today, we have the case for the first time in human existence on Earth, if you click again, please, to have the scientific justification for declaring a state of planetary emergency. This means that we're undermining the stability of the entire Earth system. So if you take the next, if you're not on my screen, yeah, so next again, yeah. So this means, that takes us to the topic of this forum, that we must now become stewards of all the systems that regulate the stability of the planet. And that's the global commons. The global commons is no longer only the high seas, the ice sheets, the ocean components that nobody owns, and outer space. It's also all the large biophysical systems on land and in the oceans that we depend on for the stability of the planet. And we know which ones these are. If you take the next slide. We have recently mapped the so-called tipping elements that regulates the state of the planet. This is a publication that came out just before COVID, showing for the first time a mapping of the 9, shown on the screen, 9 of the 15 large tipping elements that are showing signs of being on the move towards tipping points, what Ho-Sing Lee pointed out. And what you see here is the Amazon rainforest, you see West Antarctica, you see the Arctic sea ice, and you see the AMOC, the so-called Atlantic overturning circulation. And if you look carefully at these systems, they have arrows in between them. So the drama here is that we have more and more scientific evidence to show that if we push the Arctic sea ice too far in Greenland, it will impact the ocean circulation of heat in the North Atlantic, which in turn impacts rainfall on the Amazon, which in turn increase forest fires, droughts, and the risk of tipping the Amazon rainforest, and holds more warm surface waters in the Southern Ocean, which accelerates the melting of Antarctica. These are all interconnected systems, and that they might start moving in a cascade fashion. Next slide, please. So that's why we need planetary boundaries. We need science-based targets that gives us a safe operating space in green for all the systems, all the global commons that regulate the state of the planet. We have the science for this. We show that 4 of the 9, shown here in yellow and red, are beyond the safe space, and we're seeing the impacts. So this is our challenge. And if you take the final slide, the challenge, therefore, which I think is also a case for inspiration for us in the Tokyo Forum, is that we are at this point furthest to the left of transgressing boundaries that put our future on Earth at risk. We have many, many pathways to the future on innovation, equity, development, SDGs, but now is the time to recognize that we as a collective, as humanity, must start integrated governance of all the global commons, from equity to innovation, industries, cities, food system transitions, energy transitions, to take us to a point where we have the global commons governed within planetary boundaries, not for the sake of a stable planet, but for the sake of our own human future on Earth. And the Tokyo Forum is a centerpiece in that dialogue. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dominic.
Thank you so much, Johan Rockström, for that incredibly insightful and beautifully communicated overview. Johan, just as a quick question to you, what sort of reaction do you get when you make these presentations to leaders of the world and leaders of business? I know you do that an awful lot. You're a brilliant scientific communicator. Do people feel kind of overwhelmed, or kind of what can I do? I'm just one actor in a bigger system. Or do you get a sense of fear or hope? Or what's your impression, given how compelling the scientific case is that you put forward?
Well, that's a big question, Dominic, and to just answer that in a very, very kind of succinct, up-to-date fashion, is that I feel that we've turned a corner in the sense that sustainability has reached a new mature narrative, that this scientific update on the potential catastrophic risks we're facing is immediately translated into a dialogue on action, because we're seeing more and more evidence that countries and businesses are adopting science-based targets, that there is a sense of recognition that the transition towards a zero-carbon future is not a threat. It is actually, as you pointed out yourself, generating new jobs, a new competitive edge. So I think, I never stop these talks with only the diagnostic today, but always connecting it, very much inspired by people like Christiana, Paul, and Vera, and others who are in the domain of solutions, so that we get kind of a integrated story of both diagnostic and pathways to the future.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Johan. I'm sure we'll be coming back to you. I'm sure people all around who've been watching this are choking on their cocoa or their cornflakes as they were seeing that overview. Christiana, to you, in the sort of domain of solutions and action, as Johan mentioned, you've been at the heart of building such extraordinary collaborations. For example, the heart of the Paris Agreement on climate change in 2015, and the whole Project Optimism movement since then. What is your reflection about the movements that you're seeing among governments and society more generally that have been emerging, if you like, since 2015 to try and respond to what seems like an overwhelming challenge of managing our global commons?
Well, first of all, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Thank you very much to Naoko for bringing us together. Thank you, Dominic, for moderating this, and a warm hello to all of my friends here with whom I am sharing the stage today. I just wanted to build a quick bridge between Johan's as usual, brilliant presentation and where we humans who are here today on this planet. Because Johan has explained where we are with respect to the millions of years of the existence of this planet, and reminded us that actually we humans have only been here for a wink of an eye. We've been here for basically a couple of thousand years, which is a very, very short time period with respect to the 4.5 billion years of the existence of the planet. Now, the interesting thing about our human presence on this planet is that, as Johan has explained, we have disrupted the natural evolution of the planet, but B, the other very, very important thing that we have to realize is that right now in 2020, we still have the capacity to influence what is going to happen from here on. And I will give you many factors of hope that we're actually doing the right thing, or at least walking in the right direction. But I want to really nail down the idea that it is over the next 10 years, and only over the next 10 years, from here to 2030, that we can influence what is going to happen in the future. We have full influence over that right now and over the next 10 years. The scary thing is that after 2030, it basically doesn't really matter what humans do, because we will lose control. We will have gone beyond the balance that Johan has been explaining, and we will be in danger of those tipping points having a domino effect on each other, and we will lose total control. So what that means is that those of us who are here right now, those of us who are adults, sitting at the adult table, taking decisions, whether those are political decisions, investment decisions, corporate decisions, we are basically holding the future of the presence of humanity in our hands. After 2030, it basically no longer matters what we do. We have the full capacity to determine what will happen on this planet only if we are able to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 1/2 with respect to current levels over the next 10 years. So a moment of truth, a moment of true reflection of what is the role of humanity on this planet, and do we want to safeguard the presence of humanity on this planet for years to come? And I hope that the answer to that question is most definitely so. So in front of this very determining decade, what we call the decisive decade, are we actually beginning to do the right thing? Well, yes and no. Yes, we're beginning to do the right thing because we have already set the direction for stabilizing our climate. And let me explain a couple of data points that would buttress that statement. First, finance sector, the capital markets. The reality that Johan has put out has begun to spark the concern of capital markets and of the fact that our values, our assets are at risk of losing their value. And that is why the financial sector has begun to shift in direct proportion to their understanding of both the physical risks as well as the value destruction risks that they're facing. That is why over 100 banks around the world have already excluded coal as an asset from their portfolios, and many of these are beginning to look at oil and gas. There is a diminishing appetite and tolerance to have oil and gas that are also in danger of becoming stranded assets and are causing the problems that Johan has just explained. So on the capital market side, already starting to walk away from the problematic assets and move over to cleaner, much more efficient assets and technologies. At the same time, there are 18 central banks, including the Central Bank of China, that are currently doing climate stress tests to the national economy on running models of runaway climate and what that would mean. Once you have central banks doing stress tests of the exposure to climate, you know that the financial sector has begun to understand the danger that we're in. Moving over to corporations beyond financial, the financial sector, moving over to corporations, we already have more than 1,000 corporations that have joined something that we call the Race to Zero, which is corporations that and other sectors that have understood that they have to go to net zero by 2050. And that, of course, builds on the original divest invest movement, where 1,200 corporations totaling $14 trillion have actually engaged already in that shift of capital, in the shift of products and services over to the cleaner economy. What has been fascinating to me over the past 12 to 18 months is that we're seeing now iconic companies come forward to say, actually, all of you who negotiated the Paris Agreement and came to the statement that we have to be at carbon neutrality by 2050, you were not ambitious enough. The fact is that the emergency is such, and the possibilities are such that we can actually fast forward that date. So you have Amazon, not one of the smallest companies of the world, already putting out its climate neutrality pledge by 2040, and inviting other companies to join that accelerated pace. You have Apple, Nike, Starbucks saying even 2040 is too late. We're going to be at net zero by 2030. Then you have other iconic companies like IKEA, Microsoft, and Google saying being net zero by 2030, that is not enough. We're going to be climate positive by 2030, meaning they will be able to capture more carbon out of the air than they are emitting. That race to the top of corporations indicates to me two things. A, that there is increased understanding among large companies and increasingly small and medium companies of the danger that we're all in, the risks to continued business, but also that they are beginning to understand the opportunities of decarbonization. And that, I think, is the most important, because for years we have talked about the responsibility and treated decarbonization of the economy or of our investment portfolios or of our products and services. If we're a company, we've always thought about it as though it were only a burden. But we are turning that page and beginning to understand that decarbonization is the cradle of innovation. It is the cradle of resilience. It is the cradle of better financial performance. That change in mindset, to me, to answer Naoko's question of what do we have to do to protect the global commons, is to shift the mindset and understand that protecting the global commons should not only be on the defensive, but rather put the other foot forward and understand that it is the best thing that we can do to thrive. It is the best thing that we can do to build our economy, to continue to grow a responsible, resilient economy that can support human population and protect nature at the same time. That shift in mindset is what is going to allow us to do what we need to do over the next 10 years. Shifting over now to geopolitics, because how can we talk about this without geopolitics? I've been delighted also to see over the past 12 months the huge shift that we've seen in many economies. Let me start with China, where President Xi Jinping in just a few months ago announced, before the results of the US election, in fact, even when we had no idea how the US elections would go, President Xi Jinping announced that China would peak its emissions before 2030 and be at carbon neutrality before 2060. A major turning point for China that also responds to the changing understanding that this is an opportunity for China. That was followed, of course, by very important announcements of Japan, of Korea, recently of even countries like South Africa and Colombia, developing countries that have understood the same truth, that this is the only way to safeguard our presence and to build a thriving economy. And then, of course, we had the US election. That means that we will now have the United States also joining ranks with those other countries. So a huge geopolitical shift that means that last year we only had 25% of the global economy that was under some kind of carbon responsibility. By next year, by the time the US changes the White House hands, we will have well over 60 or almost 70% of the global economy under responsibility of climate. What that actually means is that we may have substantially shifted the impact that we're having on increased temperatures. The very, very recent report that has been put out by the Climate Action Tracker says that we, including all of this that I have just said, that we may now be on track to a global warming increase of 2.1 degrees for the first time in history, because just before Paris, we were heading for anywhere between 4 and 6 degrees. Paris Agreement and the commitments that were registered on the Paris Agreement shaved off from there and put us around 3 degrees, which is much better, but still way too dangerous. We are now currently, apparently, but this remains to be verified, we have now shaved off again the danger, and we may be at 2.1 degrees track. Good news, but not enough, because frankly, we have to continue to shave off those emissions and get to a path that would get us to no more than 1.5. But you see that the direction of travel is the correct direction, and that we're moving in the correct direction, although, as we have just heard from everyone this morning, not at the right scale and speed. So scale and speed remain the concern, but direction has been now confirmed, and we are on track with that. So good news, but also a healthy degree of concern about scale and speed.
Christiana, thank you so much. That was a brilliant overview there for people who perhaps haven't been close to the debate to hear about the movements across finance, across business, and the new geopolitical wave, and how it actually is having an impact. It is denting the curve. We're on our way, scale and speed being the key. That's a perfect segue, Paul Polman, to you. So you're perhaps one of the best known business leaders who've been pushing this agenda along with Christiana and Johan and others for several years. Perhaps when you started, people were a bit skeptical. Perhaps now they are less skeptical, but it would be fascinating to hear, and building on what Christiana said, your viewpoints on how goes the battle. Is it a scale and speed challenge? Are there still some skeptics out there? And in particular, given the geography that the Tokyo Forum represents in Japan and South Korea, as Christiana was saying, and these new net zero targets, is there, you sense, more optimism or more skepticism and more engagement that might be required from some leading Japanese, South Korean, other Asian companies to match those that we heard from Christiana? Paul, over to you, sir.
No, thanks, Dominic, and appreciate it. And welcome also, and hello to my fellow panel members, but most importantly, Naoko, we are so happy to be able to support you, not least for all the things you have done over the years, which has great admiration from all of us. But more importantly, what you now again are going to do with the Global Commons Institute, with the University of Tokyo. And this is more important than ever because you can influence the Asia region, which I think has obviously an enormous size and scale already right now and is certainly moving, but is also the region that is most at risk. 2/3 of the GDP that is at risk globally that Johan and Christiana so eloquently talked about is actually in your region. And I believe that getting together with Japan and Korea, now hopefully 2 leading countries, will also set the pace for countries around it. We have seen that with the commitments already taken by Prime Minister Abe in Japan or South Korea, both going to net zero, we're starting to see movements happening in Philippines or in Australia or in Indonesia that need to start to reconfigure their economies, their coal dependency, and move to this better world. And there's no question about it that this is an issue of opportunity. Johan was very clear to point out the threat, and I think people are well clear about that in terms of understanding that. But then there is a sort of a paralysis of what do we do about it? There's no question that we are in a difficult situation globally, where globalism doesn't quite work at the scale we want it to work, and where I believe companies need to step up to de-risk this political process and help move forward. And Christiana already mentioned on climate specifically, some companies that have taken a very aggressive stance, and I do believe, like her, that we're seeing slowly a race to the top emerging coming out of this. If you go really quickly to the speed and scale, which I think is really the issue that we're now talking about, the main thing that we're trying to do is to get the system changes. I've always said I believe in the goodness of people, but collectively we've not been able to make the changes that we know are needed. Never ever have we been so forewarned about what is going to happen. And frankly, I also believe never ever have we been so forearmed to do something about it. And yet, sadly enough, we are willing to incur very high cost of our failure. COVID, $12 trillion. The world spending on conflict prevention and wars, $8 to $10 trillion. Whilst the implementation for our solutions would just require a steady $2 to $3 trillion every year. And I'm talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, the simple objective to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. The simple objective of not leaving anybody behind. We all understand that at the end, it's about people. If COVID and climate change and many of the other disasters have taught us one thing, it is that the poor, and especially women and girls, always pay the price for it. So why should we live in a system where the cost of inaction continues to exceed now significantly the cost of action? So if you turn that around, then you come to an enormous business opportunity. And any business that understands that will be doing very well for a long time to come. And any that doesn't understand that and continues to be part of that problem, I think will be relegated to the graveyard of dinosaurs. Now, what is difficult here? The difficulty is that if you run a business today, you not only have a million priorities, you need to work on equality, you need to work on gender balance, you need to work on climate change, you need to work on biodiversity, you need to work on food security. How do you handle all this complexity and boil it down to simplicity and concrete actions? That's why we have frameworks like the Sustainable Development Goals. But the second challenge is that we're operating sometimes in systems that don't work for us. If we do something and our competitors don't, we're at a disadvantage. If I do something, I'm only a small part of the value chain, and I need other parts of the value chain also to do this. I would love to do it, but some of the governments still don't get it and have the wrong rules, laws, or regulations out there that don't help me achieve the objectives that we've all set out to achieve. So this is the time to look at systems change, and this is the time for business to step up. We need to decarbonize the global economy. That's not easy. We've never done that. We need to decarbonize our electricity system as part of that. This is a big challenge. We need to move to a circular or a regenerative economy, as Johan pointed out. Earth's overshoot day was this year, August 22nd, which means after that day, we are using more resources than the world can replenish, which means we're actually stealing from future generations. How do we move not only to a circular, but a regenerative? How do we create an economic system that doesn't create bigger and bigger discrepancies and inequalities, but actually brings us closer together as one tribe humanity? And finally, how do we convert the financial markets, as Christiana was talking about, to actually be serving the global economy, to be financing these transitions, and not to put pressure on business itself to be very short-term oriented? Now, the Sustainable Development Goals need business. I've looked at the 17 goals and 169 targets, and 85% of them require business without any doubt. But I also believe that business needs the sustainable development goals. There is no business case in enduring poverty. And with all the costs that we are now incurring because we're not responding to what is needed, business are the first ones to incur these costs. Business globally is about 60% of the global GDP, 80% of the financial flow, and 90% of the job creation. It provides resources, technology, innovation, people, know-how. So business is needed to provide the SDGs. But at the same time, we need the governments and others to provide the frameworks. And this is where the partnership that I'm talking about comes in. The partnership for what I call the common good, putting the interests of others ahead of our own, and by doing so, being better off ourselves as well. The issues and the challenges to drive these system changes that I talked about cannot be solved by any company alone. We've seen heroic work by companies also in the Far East. I would argue that the commitments from the government in Japan and in South Korea came because civil society spoke up, but also an enormous amount of businesses. But then you discover as a business that you can only do so much by yourself. Sure, you can make your model more responsible. Sure, you can try to green a little bit more or try to buy sustainable source materials or work on your human rights in the value chain. But ultimately, it requires whole industries to change and governments to come in there as well with the right frameworks. Otherwise, how do we deal with issues like plastics in the oceans, getting out of perverse subsidies that are still around fossil fuel, ensuring that the money that is being spent on redesigning these global economies for the future, that money is well spent. And this is where the partnership comes in, and this is where the private sector comes in. Anytime the private sector, who is the prime beneficiary of this, works together collectively or with these broader coalitions with civil society and governments, we see things moving faster at the speed and scale that is needed, and we see business benefiting from that. Businesses that go first will have that advantage. Businesses that trail will go, as I said, most likely out of business with the pace of scale and speed of scale of change that we're seeing. Finally, on COVID, I think there's one data point that I find very interesting, that the ESG funds, companies that run their business on environmental, social, and governance, that look at a long-term multi-stakeholder model, these companies have done significantly better over the last 3, 5, 10 years and have also shown to be more resilient during the crisis. And not surprisingly, the financial market that has invested in environmental, social, and governance funds that look at this holistically have also been the ones that are better performing. So I do believe that we are seeing a tipping point, and I do believe that it would be in the interest of all businesses, including, or I would argue, especially in the Far East, to be part of these broader coalitions to drive these systems changes that we now need.
Paul Pullman, thank you so much. If any of you are listening and taking notes, you're experiencing maybe 3 or 4 MBAs and PhDs in action here. The richness of what has been set out from the scientific, from the geopolitical and the global collaboration and the business perspective is incredible. Paul, thank you so much for that. There are so many interesting things in there, not only about the leadership of one business entity on its own, but also these collaborations and how actually working together to shape the market, given all the opportunities that exist, and helping to get governments to provide enabling policies to speed up that transition. A lot there. Vera Songwe, perhaps we can turn to you. You're the Undersecretary General and Executive Secretary for the Economic Commission for Africa. Some might say that what we've been hearing is okay for richer countries, but not something that can work for poorer countries. In fact, one of the questions that has come through from our audience, and thank you very much for sending it in, is would it not be better to reframe the climate crisis, this crisis of the global commons, as an economic development crisis? So what kind of new economies do we need? Is this sort of conversation something that resonates for Africa? as far as you can see, Vera. We talk in other parts of the world of a Green New Deal. We've seen that FDI, foreign direct investment, has collapsed a wee bit because of the COVID crisis. We've seen official development assistance under pressure. Is there some new economic paradigm at work here for Africa and perhaps the less developed nations of the world? Be very interesting to get your thoughts. Vera Songwe.
Thank you, Walter. Thanks for this and to the World Economic Forum. But let me start, first of all, by sending a hi to all of us, our very, very good friend, Naoko. Naoko has been a leader in this field in many, many dimensions. We've worked before together in her different hats and finance in Jeff, and now leading the Center for Global Commons. I think that, first of all, Naoko, congratulations for this amazing forum. But really, I think you are sitting at the right place at the right time, and thanks for bringing us all together. Also to my fellow panelists, I think exactly as you said, you know, it's 5 MBAs all put together, the information that we're getting. But yesterday, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, said that, you know, it was time for us to sort of turn on the switch on the green economy and to begin. Otherwise, you know, the world was broken, or the, you know, our world as we know it, and that's what Christiana said, is broken. I think for Africa, and your question is really spot on. It is about the two things, and actually, as Paul was talking, I was thinking, you know, if you take every African state, it's like a business, right? And essentially, what we do want to do is see how we can grow, you know, the business, increase net value, create prosperity, while at the same time protecting the environment. And for Africa, the conversation is a little bit similar but different. And I want to start with the end of both Christiana's conversation and also Paul, which is essentially the need for a real global commons meeting, a real global multilateralism. And I sometimes talk about sort of the new multilateralism will be regional constellations that come together. And I think, you know, Asia and Africa are in somewhat similar situations around this climate conversation. As Paul was saying, you know, Asia is the hardest hit, Africa is less hit. We actually have carbon sinks, which we can actually provide to Asia. And I think that there is a market that is ready to be exploited if we actually had a conversation in that spirit. And I think that Naoko, as we prepare in Japan in particular for going to the next TCAD, I think there is a conversation there about what do we want to do in this forum that talks about how we can actually reinforce each other in this challenge going forward, because Africa has been providing, you know, carbon sinks for a long time, but those carbon sinks are reducing. And so while we want to go to net zero, we want to also ensure that Africa stays as a net provider of moving to net zero. And I think in that exchange, we can find amazing convergence between ourselves and Asia in particular. And let me take another example, particularly for all the Japanese and Koreans that are listening to us. When you're in any African country today, all the cars on the streets come from Asia, right? You know, we're all driving, you know, some version of those cars, but most of them are secondhand cars that emitting, you know, huge amounts of global green gas, you know. And so the question is, can we work together to say, maybe you just move the production factories to Africa. And so essentially what you then take away is the cost, first of all, of transportation, which we know is a huge part of the problem, but also the pollution that those second-hand cars bring to the continent. So I think we have a growing number of African countries, Benin, Ethiopia, Mauritius, Namibia, Seychelles, that are beginning to realize that, you know, they can make a commitment, which is an economic growth commitment, to net zero emissions by 2050, or even maybe earlier. And I think this is in some sense, if one were to respond to the SG, this is the light switch going on. It's saying, yes, if I make a 2050 commitment to net zero, it can actually be an economic commitment as well, and it can create the jobs. On the continent, we need somewhere in the order of 16 million jobs, essentially, to continue to grow. And I think Paul knows this very well. And we have begun to do a lot of work that shows, you know, if you do climate resilient, nature-based solutions, let's take, for example, a very easy, and we're talking about the health crisis today. 23 million women across the world, but mostly in Africa, suffer from respiratory diseases because of poor cooking gases. How can we change that? How can we change that dynamic? By changing that dynamic, we get new energy, new cooking stove materials, which creates business, creates small and medium enterprises, but also stops forest degradation. So I think there is a very nice, and we have so many of this, no longer little pilots, no longer little examples, but I think broad scale examples that we can take to scale on the continent. But we cannot do that. And as you said, Walter, we cannot do that without talking about the financing. And this is again where the East and Japan in particular, and Aoko Yue in the Ministry of Finance and the central bank, when you think about what is happening today with the crisis, $13 trillion of additional liquidity has been put into, the global OECD economies, including Japan and Korea in particular, to ensure that, we don't have a crisis that goes out of proportion in its magnitude. And I think, as Paul said, the worst crisis we have had in over a century. Africa needs an equivalent amount of resources like that to be able to respond to this crisis. Now, when you think about in Japan, the cost of investments are actually very, very low. So a lot of the developed world is actually borrowing at concessional rates. And a lot of the developing world, because of the conversation around sort of, debt sustainability and all, are actually borrowing at high and expensive market rate. So is there a case where maybe the Central Bank of Japan, maybe the Ministry of Finance of Japan, and now this is work that we can do together, as we hear $11 trillion in the private sector ready to invest in new and clean technology, can we come together, see whether we can de-risk, whether we can bring some blended financing to Africa for new investments in energy, for new investments in roads. We need high-speed trains that are Asia does them very well. So it's a win-win. We bring the investments from Asia, we create jobs on the continent, and we're moving to net zero at the same time. And also managing the debt sustainability conversation, because the cost of borrowing in countries like Japan are quite low. So I think if we begin to pull this together, we actually are talking, as you have seen, about creating an economy that recovers, growing forward better, but ensuring that we get to net zero together. And I think, as Christiana said, we don't then need to wait for 2050. We can actually do it much faster. And I think this is a little bit the context in which these conversations around global commons has to happen, is multilateralism, regional efforts together, and then, and most importantly, how we finance this new growing forward together in a way that takes us to net zero emissions, but at the same time ensures that we create jobs both here on the continent, but also I think, as we begin to talk about solar powered cars and all that, the R&D would say will continue to happen in Japan, will continue to happen in South Korea, because they need jobs too. But you need markets as well, and 1.3 trillion billion people on the continent. We have an African Continental Free Trade Area agreement that creates one single large market that allows you to deliver, I think, on these things in a collective and more sustainable fashion.
Vera Songwe, thank you so much. That's another DPhil MBA added. So it's a brilliant, brilliant discussion. It's just fantastic. To take this into that kind of economic growth perspective, to link it to the challenges, the FDI leaving, the pool of institutional investment capital that is out there, where there's such low yields on kind of current government bond rates for some investors, but huge returns possible for these kind of infrastructural investments into Africa. The untapped demand, the Ghanas, the Nigerias, the Rwandas, the Ethiopias, where I believe you are, and many others, in terms of that green investment, that green economy, agriculture. We haven't even managed to talk about that really in this discussion, the regenerative agricultural possibilities and the free trade zones that Africa offers, across borders. Incredible. This takes us way beyond a discussion that some might perceive to be that there are some environmental campaigners that are trying to stop growth. This is all about unleashing growth and investment and jobs and innovation and capacity and entrepreneurialism across Africa and back into Asia. Naiko Ishii, you've got all of this on your plate with the new Global Commons Center at the University of Tokyo. I hope that the wonderful panel that you've assembled have thrown up a host of good ideas for you to think about. There's an incredible amount to do, and as I think it was Christiana said, you know, not only scale and speed, but also a time envelope. This is the next 10 years, or else we might as well do something else after 2011, 2012. This has got to be done now. So in that context, can you tell us a bit about the Center for Global Commons at the University of Tokyo, which you'll be leading, and what it will be doing to help kind of push this agenda now, and in some of the areas that you've just heard about, particularly perhaps on the finance side, given your incredibly interesting role. Many people might forget that you were Vice Minister of Finance for Japan, then at the World Bank, then in charge of a very large financial institution, a global environment facility, and now back at the University of Tokyo. Naoko Ishii, over to you to close us out.
Thank you so much. Actually, my plate is really becoming more than full, and I really try to digest and all of those and great and food for thought. Thank you so much and for my fellow panelists. I have to say I have been quite overwhelmed to understand the narrative has changed dramatically, maybe for the past year or so. I thought that Johan, Christiana, Paul have been always quite upbeat and try to get the people motivated with a very optimistic tone. Now I hear very differently today. Yes, that science is clear, that has not changed, but the way we understand science really sent a quite urgent message to us that the Christiana so clearly mentioned we have really only 10 years to not to lose the control after 2030. It's too late. That's a kind of crystal clear message. Really forced me to think what we could do things differently. At the same time, of course, then every one of you also emphasized that this situation is also the cradle for the opportunity, and we have seen some good signs that are moving forward, including the business and financial markets. So it's yes, the direction is okay, but speed and scale is a problem. And I really want to appreciate what Paul said, that the real difficulty is how we can really get ourselves out of this system stalemate so that we can really move systematically forward to achieve this scale and speed. And his an explanation of why multi-stakeholder coalition that important is something we really need to take. And I feel quite a responsibility sitting here representing actually in Tokyo, and then hearing that the huge expectation of net zero commitment by our leadership and the Korean leadership, and it will add up to the 60–70% of the world economy under some kind of commitment. But the question for us is, do we really know how we can get there? That I remain kind of, I hear the Japanese general public remain still anxious that while proud of this announcement, do we really know how to get there? How we can do things differently tomorrow, be as a consumer, the investor, and then the business. And so that's something that we need to feel. That is a missing piece for us to ensure those commitments be realized that to the real pathway forward. And actually that's where the Center for Global Commons comes in. We try to bring those pieces together. We actually work with the PIC, Johan Rockström, of the pathway scenarios, so that we can have a long-term plan up to 2050. Then that we can have a kind of index so that to guide individual decision-making, be it the consumer, investor, or the company and the country, to do things differently. But this multi-stakeholder coalition is another very important instrument so that we can bring ourselves out of this system stalemate. The center's idea is to bring those key pieces, instruments together so that we can move much quickly and easily to achieve and scale and speed, which Christiana, Paul, everybody is mentioning. But my last word, yes, Vera, I hear you, and I hear your call. It is also our opportunity to how we can do things that together, and so that through that the financial sector, this de-risking facility, how we could really put the meat of this global multilateral coalition. I already started to see the financial sector has been moving, and this is really our opportunity to continue to push that kind of financial sector to collectively add value, identify, measure, and value, and consistently report the value of natural capital or human capital, societal capital. That kind of standardization, that kind of effort is extremely important, because then we can steer the financial sector, financial resources into the right direction, the direction we would like to see. Back to you, Dominic. Really committed to work, all of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naoko. And this just sets the scene, I think, for what will be a brilliant center for the Global Commons at the University of Tokyo. The finance, the collaborations, the work between government, civil society, science, the business sector, that link to Africa, Japan, South Korea. There's all sorts of huge possibilities. A very, very exciting next chapter, and it couldn't be in safer and smarter hands than yours, Naoko. So thank you. And thank you, the wonderful panel, Johan and Christiana and Paul and Vera, for all of you watching. That was a kind of a snapshot of such rich information about where we've come from and what needs to happen next. So by all means, please follow up with the organizers and such to find out more. Do stay tuned for Tokyo Forum 2020 Global Commons. As coming right up will be a few more reflections from Naoko Ishii with the Tokyo Forum MC, Hiroko Kuniya, followed by a great panel which will discuss whether COVID-19, which we touched upon a little bit here, is a game changer for the Global Commons. So from here in Geneva and at the World Economic Forum, myself, Dominic Warre, and again, a brilliant, brilliant discussion. Thank you, everyone. Really good to see you all. And Naoko, thank you so much. And back to you, Tokyo Forum, for the next stage in your debate. Thank you so much, and goodbye from all of us.